The moment Sebastian Andrews first laid eyes on her, he knew his carefully ordered world was about to be disrupted. She moved between guests with practiced ease, her auburn hair catching the light as she tilted a bottle of Cabernet at precisely the right angle, explaining something about tannins and terroir that made the small gathering of patrons nod appreciatively. Sebastian hadn't planned to attend this exclusive wine tasting event at Napa Valley's renowned Crescent Estate Vineyards, but his business partner had insisted it would be good for him to live a little after closing their latest acquisition. Sebastian adjusted his watch, a subtle Patek Philippe that cost more than what most people made in a year, and surveyed the sunlit terrace. Vineyard rows stretched toward distant mountains, the late afternoon sun casting everything in a golden glow. At 42, Sebastian had built his real estate development empire through discipline and focus, not by wasting time at social events where people pretended to taste the difference between wines that all cost more than they should. Mr. Andrews. A staff member approached with practiced deference. Miss Henderson thought you might enjoy joining the private tasting in the cellar. They're opening some special reserves. Sebastian nodded, following the man through the main building and down stone steps into a temperature-controlled cellar. Only 8 other guests were present, seated around an oak table illuminated by soft lighting that made the bottle's contents shimmer like liquid jewels. "You're just in time," she said, the sommelier he'd noticed earlier. Her name tag read Olivia Wilson. Her smile reached her eyes, unusual in his experience with hospitality staff catering to the wealthy. "We're about to begin with a 2012 Pinot Noir that changed how I think about winemaking." "Bold claim," Sebastian replied, taking the empty seat. He wasn't one for flowery wine descriptions or pretension. "Bold wine," she countered without missing a beat. "Sometimes the things most worth experiencing don't announce themselves with fanfare." Something in her confident assessment made Sebastian pause. He wasn't used to being challenged, even subtly. Over the next hour, Sebastian found himself captivated not just by the wine, but by Olivia's knowledge. She didn't speak with the rehearsed lines he often heard at such events. Instead, she talked about each wine as if introducing an old friend, complete with quirks and history. When she explained how one particular winemaker had risked his entire harvest on an experimental technique during a difficult season, Sebastian recognized the entrepreneurial spirit that mirrored his own early career gambles. "You don't seem like the typical sommelier," Sebastian said when the tasting concluded and other guests began filtering out. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly is typical, Mr. Andrews?" "Sebastian," he corrected. "And I meant it as a compliment. You speak about these wines like you've lived their stories, not just memorized tasting notes." "That's because I have, in a way," she replied, efficiently collecting glasses. "I spent 3 years apprenticing with vineyards across 4 countries before landing here. Wine isn't just a beverage, it's agriculture, chemistry, history, and art in one glass." Sebastian leaned against the table. "And how does someone with clearly extensive education end up pouring drinks for rich people who can't tell the difference anyway?" Her movements paused, and Sebastian immediately regretted his phrasing. "First," she said, resuming her work without looking at him, "I'm not pouring drinks. I'm education director here, and I curate the cellar collection." She finally met his eyes. "Second, most people can tell the difference when someone takes the time to show them what to look for, even rich people." Sebastian felt something unusual embarrassment. He was used to directing conversations, not misstepping in them. "I apologize," he said genuinely. "That came out wrong." Olivia's expression softened slightly. "Apology accepted, though I'm curious why someone who seems skeptical about wine distinctions would attend an exclusive tasting event." "Business obligation," Sebastian admitted. "My partner thought I needed to network more." "And how's that working out?" There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "Honestly, I've spent the entire event talking to exactly one person." "Then I'd say it was a spectacular failure," she replied with a smile that somehow made her statement feel like a shared secret. Sebastian found himself smiling back. "Or perhaps exactly the opposite." He surprised himself by leaving his card not the standard business one, but his personal contact with a handwritten note, in case you ever want to educate another skeptic about wine distinctions. It had been years since he'd made such an impulsive gesture. 3 days later, Sebastian was reviewing acquisition plans for a waterfront property in San Francisco when his private line rang. "Mr. Andrews, this is Olivia Wilson from Crescent Estate." Sebastian found himself sitting straighter. "I remember you well, Miss Wilson." "Olivia," she corrected, echoing his earlier adjustment. "I'm calling because we're having a special vertical tasting tomorrow evening comparing the same wine across different vintages. It might change your perspective on whether distinctions matter." There was a challenge in her voice. "Are you offering me an education, Olivia? Consider it community service," she replied. "Helping the privileged expand their horizons." Sebastian laughed, a genuine sound that surprised his assistant passing by his office door. What time should this student arrive? The next evening, Sebastian arrived at the vineyard to find it was not a public event. Olivia was waiting alone in the same cellar, 6 bottles arranged before 2 place settings. "I thought this was an event," Sebastian said, taking in the intimate setting. "It is an educational event, for one." Olivia gestured to the chair across from her. "Unless you'd prefer a crowd." "No," Sebastian replied, setting down his jacket, "though I question if this is the standard treatment for all skeptics." Olivia uncorked the first bottle with practiced efficiency. "Only the ones who leave interesting notes." The evening unfolded differently than any wine tasting Sebastian had experienced. Olivia didn't just explain the wines. She told stories of hailstorms that had threatened harvests, of family feuds that influenced blending decisions, of techniques passed through generations. "You really love this," Sebastian observed, watching her face animate as she explained how soil composition affected flavor. "I do," she acknowledged. "Wine connects everything I find fascinating: science, history, art, geography. Each bottle is a time capsule of a specific place and moment." She studied him. "What about you? What drives someone to build an empire of buildings?" Sebastian considered the question longer than he normally would. "Creation," he finally said. "Taking empty space and creating something permanent, something that changes how people live, work, interact." "Not just profit?" she asked, her directness refreshing. "Profit is how you keep score," he admitted. "But no, it's never been just about money. Money just makes more creation possible." As they tasted the final wine, Sebastian realized 3 hours had passed. He hadn't checked his phone, once unprecedented in his typically hyperconnected life. "So," Olivia asked, "can you taste the differences now?" Sebastian considered the glasses before him. "Yes, actually, though I suspect it has more to do with the teacher than the student." "A good teacher just removes barriers to what's already there," she replied. When Sebastian left that night, he felt an unfamiliar restlessness. He'd spent an evening with an intelligent, passionate woman who hadn't once mentioned his net worth or business ventures, a rarity in his experience. Over the next 2 weeks, Sebastian found himself creating reasons to return to Napa. He attended a winemaker dinner where Olivia was presenting. He scheduled a business lunch at a restaurant where she was guest curating the wine list. Each interaction deepened his fascination. Olivia was knowledgeable but unpretentious, serious about her craft, but quick to laugh. On his 4th visit, after they'd spent an afternoon touring smaller, family-owned vineyards in the valley, Sebastian finally addressed what was becoming obvious. "This is the most time I've spent away from work in 15 years, he said as they watched the sunset from a hilltop vineyard. "And I'm beginning to suspect it has very little to do with developing an appreciation for wine." Olivia turned to him, the fading sunlight catching in her hair. "Are you always this direct, Sebastian? Time is valuable, clarity saves it." He met her gaze. "I'd like to see you in a context that doesn't involve wine education." "You mean a date?" The corner of her mouth lifted. "Yes, dinner, perhaps, in San Francisco." Olivia considered him for a moment. "I have a counter-proposal. Dinner at my place. I'm an excellent cook, and that way we won't have photographers speculating about who the real estate magnate is dining with." Sebastian blinked, surprised by her consideration. He was used to dates who wanted to be seen with him, who valued the cachet his wealth brought. "That sounds perfect," he said simply. Olivia's home was a modest but charming cottage on the edge of St. Helena with a small garden and a spectacular view of the valley. When Sebastian arrived the following Saturday, he was struck by how the space perfectly reflected the woman he was coming to know, unpretentious but thoughtful, with books stacked on side tables and framed maps of wine regions on the walls. "Not what you expected?" Olivia asked, noting his appraisal as she took the wine he'd brought. "I try not to have expectations about people's homes," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true, "but it suits you. It feels lived in." "Unlike your place, I imagine," she said, leading him to a kitchen where something aromatic was simmering. Sebastian thought of his penthouse overlooking the bay, professionally decorated, impressive, and yes, somewhat impersonal. "My home is efficient." "That," Olivia said while stirring her creation, "is the saddest description of a home I've ever heard." The evening unfolded with an ease that surprised Sebastian. Olivia had prepared a rustic French cassolette that put most restaurant offerings to shame. They talked about everything: her childhood in Oregon, his early days struggling to secure his first development loan, books they'd loved, places they wanted to see. "So how does someone go from studying international business to becoming a sommelier?" Sebastian asked as they moved to her small patio with glasses of dessert wine. Olivia leaned back in her chair, looking at the stars. "I was working in corporate consulting, making good money, hating every minute of it. During a business trip to Bordeaux, I took a weekend wine tour. The guide was this 80-year-old woman who knew every vine, every soil variation. She talked about the land like it was alive." Olivia's eyes were distant with memory. "I remember thinking, I want to care about something that much, so I quit when I got home. Everyone thought I was having a breakdown. Were you the opposite? I was finally seeing clearly." She looked at him directly. "What about you? Ever thought about doing something else?" Sebastian hadn't considered the question in years. "I love what I've built," he said slowly. "But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to focus on just one project, to see something smaller through from conception to completion, rather than managing a portfolio of developments. What would you build if you could build anything?" The question lingered between them, and Sebastian found himself sharing ideas he hadn't voiced even to his closest associates about sustainable communities, about spaces designed for human connection rather than just efficiency and profit. When he finally left that night, Sebastian kissed her, not the practiced, confident kiss he might have given, but something gentler, a question rather than a statement. Olivia's response was warm and unhurried, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "I'd like to see you again," he said, straightforward as always. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she replied. Over the next month, they created a rhythm between their worlds. Sebastian rearranged meetings to spend long weekends in Napa. Olivia occasionally came to San Francisco, though she seemed less comfortable in his world of high rises and exclusive restaurants than he was becoming in hers of vineyards and farmers' markets. On one such visit, Sebastian took her to the site of his newest development, an empty lot with spectacular bay views where construction was set to begin in months. 52 luxury condominiums, he explained, watching her take in the space. "We've already sold 30% off the plans alone." Olivia walked the perimeter of the lot, her expression thoughtful. "And what will make these different from any other luxury condos in the city?" The question gave Sebastian pause. It was something he'd stopped asking himself years ago. "The location, primarily. The views." "The materials will be top tier." Olivia nodded, but something in her expression made Sebastian feel suddenly defensive. "Not every building needs to revolutionize architecture," he said. "Sometimes people just want beautiful, functional spaces." "I'm not criticizing," Olivia replied, her voice gentle. "I'm genuinely curious. You talked about creating something meaningful, and I wonder what meaning this particular creation holds for you." Her question stayed with Sebastian long after they parted that evening. He found himself reopening the plans, looking at them with fresh eyes. When was the last time he'd built something that excited him beyond its profit potential? 2 weeks later, after not seeing each other due to Olivia's travel to an international wine exposition, Sebastian invited her to dinner at his penthouse. He watched with interest as she took in his home the expansive views, the minimalist design, the carefully curated art collection. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "But not a home?" Sebastian asked, remembering her earlier comment. Olivia smiled. "It could be, it just feels like it's waiting for something." "Maybe it is," Sebastian replied, taking her hand and leading her to the dining room where his private chef had prepared dinner. Over the meal, Sebastian found himself sharing more than he had intended about growing up with parents who measured worth only in achievement, about his brief, failed marriage in his 20s to a woman who had wanted his lifestyle more than his company. "Is that why you work so much?" Olivia asked. "Because you're used to being valued for what you achieve," the question hit with unexpected force. Sebastian had spent decades building walls around certain parts of himself, yet Olivia seemed to see through them effortlessly. "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "Though I could ask if your dedication to wine is also a form of escape." "Touché," Olivia said with a small smile. "Though I'd call it seeking connection rather than escape. Wine connects me to history, to place, to people who share the experience. And what am I seeking?" Sebastian asked, curious about her perception. Olivia considered him. "I think you're seeking proof that you can create something lasting, something meaningful." She reached across the table to touch his hand. "But the buildings aren't the only things you can create that matter, Sebastian." The evening ended differently than Sebastian had planned. Instead of the physical intimacy he had anticipated, they found themselves talking until dawn, sharing vulnerabilities and hopes that Sebastian had rarely voiced. When Olivia finally fell asleep on his couch as morning light streamed through the windows, Sebastian watched her and confronted a startling truth. He was falling in love with her. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The following weeks brought a new dimension to their relationship. Sebastian began sharing more of his work with Olivia, not just the successes but the challenges. He found her perspective valuable. She asked questions his team wouldn't, seeing angles they missed precisely because she wasn't embedded in the industry. Olivia, in turn, brought Sebastian deeper into her world. He accompanied her to small family vineyards where generations worked together. He helped during a harvest, his expensive watch set aside as he sorted grapes alongside seasonal workers. These experiences shifted something fundamental in his worldview, but as their worlds merged, tensions inevitably surfaced. At a benefit gala where Sebastian was being honored for his philanthropic work, he noticed Olivia's discomfort amid the wealth and power dynamics. "You seem quiet tonight," he said as they shared a rare moment alone on a terrace. "It's just different from what I'm used to," she replied diplomatically. "Different bad," Olivia sighed. "Not bad, just, I watched people treat you differently all evening with this deference that seems based entirely on your bank account. And then they treated me differently once they realized I was with you. It's disorienting." "That's just how these events are," Sebastian said, though he understood her discomfort. "The money creates certain social patterns. Patterns you could break," Olivia pointed out. "You don't have to participate in that system just because it benefits you." Her comment struck a nerve. "I've worked hard for everything I have," Sebastian said, his tone cooler than intended. "I don't apologize for my success." "I'm not asking you to," Olivia replied evenly. "I'm suggesting that with great success comes the power to change systems, not just profit from them." The conversation ended unresolved as they were pulled back to the event, but it lingered between them in the days that followed. Sebastian found himself examining aspects of his life he'd long taken for granted, the ease with which doors opened for him, the assumptions people made, the insulation his wealth provided from life's ordinary difficulties. Meanwhile, Sebastian's business partner, Marcus, had begun expressing concerns about his frequent absences and apparent distraction. "This wine country romance is affecting your focus," Marcus said during a tense meeting about a delayed project. The Sebastian Andrews I know doesn't miss deadlines or approval windows. The project needed revisions, Sebastian replied firmly. The original design was uninspired. Since when do you care about inspiration over execution? We're developers, not artists. Maybe that's the problem, Sebastian said, surprising himself with the thought. Maybe we should care more about what we're putting into the world. Marcus stared at him. She's really gotten into your head, hasn't she? The question haunted Sebastian as he drove to Napa that weekend. Had Olivia changed him? Or had she simply revealed parts of himself he'd long suppressed in pursuit of success? When he arrived at her cottage, Sebastian found Olivia in her garden, hands deep in soil as she planted herb seedlings. The sight of her focused, at peace, creating something living clarified things somehow. I'm considering making changes to the Bayview development, he said without preamble. Olivia looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. What kind of changes? Significant ones. Reducing the number of units to create more communal spaces. Incorporating sustainable design elements that will raise costs but reduce environmental impact. Allocating 15% of the units as affordable housing. Olivia stood, brushing soil from her hands. Your investors will hate that last part. Some will, Sebastian acknowledged. Marcus certainly does, but I've been thinking about what you said about having the power to change systems, not just profit from them. This is a start. Olivia studied him, her expression softening. These changes matter to you, don't they? This isn't about impressing me. They do matter, Sebastian confirmed. And while impressing you is always a bonus, no, that's not why. I think I've been building what was expected rather than what I believed in. I want that to change. Olivia crossed the small garden to stand before him. I'm proud of you, not because you're doing what I think is right, but because you're doing what you think is right, even when it's harder. That night, their relationship deepened in new ways. As they lay together in the quiet of her bedroom, Sebastian realized he'd never felt so seen by another person, not just the successful businessman the world knew, but the man beneath with doubts, hopes, and newfound purpose. I love you, he said simply. I think I have since that first tasting when you called me out on my assumptions. Olivia's smile was radiant in the dim light. I think I started falling for you when you actually admitted you were wrong. Do you know how rare that is in a successful man? Sebastian laughed. I've been told it's one of my most irritating qualities. It's one of your best, she countered, kissing him softly. The next 6 months brought transformation. Sebastian's revised Bayview project faced initial investor resistance, but ultimately gained support when Sebastian personally guaranteed certain financial benchmarks. The press coverage praised the innovative approach, generating unexpected interest from buyers who valued the community-focused design. Olivia, meanwhile, had begun developing her own wine education program, targeting people intimidated by wine culture. Her approach, unpretentious, accessible, and deeply knowledgeable, quickly gained popularity. They settled into a rhythm between San Francisco and Napa, creating spaces in each other's homes. Sebastian's penthouse slowly transformed. Bookshelves appeared. The kitchen showed signs of actual use. Photographs replaced some of the more sterile artwork. It wasn't perfect. They argued about time management, about privilege, about whose world took priority in any given week. But the foundation remained solid. They challenged each other to grow rather than concede. On their 1-year anniversary, Sebastian took Olivia back to Crescent Estate, where they'd first met. He had arranged for the same cellar room to be set up exactly as it had been, down to the specific vintages. Recreating our first date, Olivia asked as they descended the familiar stone steps. With a few improvements, Sebastian replied. When they entered the cellar, Olivia gasped softly. The room was transformed with subtle lighting and flowers. The bottles were arranged as before, but now a small velvet box sat beside Olivia's place setting. Sebastian. He took her hands, suddenly nervous despite all his preparation. A year ago, I walked into this room thinking I knew exactly what mattered in life: efficiency, achievement, growth. I was a man who measured success in square footage and profit margins. He smiled at her. Then I met a sommelier who saw through all that, who challenged me to taste life more deeply, to consider the terroir of my decisions, what they grew from, and what they might produce. Sebastian opened the box to reveal a ring with a single, perfect diamond set in a band of intertwined gold. This isn't just about marriage, though I want that desperately. It's about partnership, building something together that's better than what either of us could create alone. Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes. Are you sure? My world is so different from yours. That's precisely why I'm sure, Sebastian said firmly. You've shown me parts of life I was missing, and I hope I've done the same for you. We balance each other. He took a breath. Olivia Wilson, will you marry me? Her smile was radiant. Yes, absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Sebastian reflected on the unexpected journey. He had built skyscrapers and transformed city skylines, but nothing compared to the joy of building this relationship foundation by foundation, moment by moment, creating something truly lasting. They were married the following spring in the vineyard where they'd watched their first sunset together. The ceremony combined elements from both their worlds, elegant but unpretentious, meaningful rather than showy. 2 years later, they welcomed their daughter, Sofia, named for the region in Bulgaria where they had traveled to explore ancient winemaking techniques during Olivia's pregnancy. Sebastian cut back his working hours to be present for his family, focusing on quality over quantity in his developments. Olivia's education program expanded nationally, bringing wine knowledge to people who had previously felt excluded from that world. Together, they purchased a small vineyard property halfway between Napa and San Francisco, a home that truly belonged to both of them. Sebastian designed a house that combined his architectural precision with Olivia's warmth and practicality. On weekends, they worked the small plot of Pinot Noir vines they'd planted, teaching Sofia about patience and cultivation. You ever miss your old life? Olivia asked one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over their vines. Sebastian considered the question, thinking of his formerly single-minded existence. I miss the simplicity sometimes, he admitted. Life was straightforward when all I cared about was the next deal, but, Olivia prompted, knowing him well. But it wasn't really living, Sebastian said, watching their daughter playing nearby. It was existing efficiently. You taught me the difference. Olivia leaned against him. And you taught me that ambition isn't something to be ashamed of, that creating change sometimes requires resources and influence. Sebastian kissed her softly. Who would have thought a skeptical millionaire and a passionate sommelier would be perfect pairing? Olivia laughed. The best wines often come from unexpected combinations, and like the finest vintages, we only get better with time. As darkness fell over their vineyard, Sebastian Andrews, still a successful developer, but now so much more, reflected on how a chance wine tasting had changed everything. His life was richer, more complex, and infinitely more satisfying than he could have imagined. Just like the wines Olivia had taught him to appreciate, the beauty was in the depth, the story, and the perfect, unexpected balance.